For 3 years, she was the only person who touched him without fear. Then, one night, his hand found her waist, and her whole body pulled away. Nia Sterling restores ruined audio, damaged tapes, dead voices, sounds no one else can save. She is black, brilliant, married to the most dangerous man in Seoul, Seo Do-jin, the Black Wolf. A dark wolf tattoo climbs the side of his neck. A city steps around him. At home, he wears no tie, and she is the one who reaches for him first. Not anymore. Now she changes in a locked bathroom. She wears long sleeves in a warm house. When he leans close, her glass rattles on the table. He thinks she stopped loving him. He thinks there's another man. He thinks she's leaving. He is wrong about all of it, because Nia is hiding something under those sleeves, and the men who put it there said 4 words she can't forget. But what her husband finds when he finally sees the truth? Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. Nia Sterling lifted the microcassette to the light and knew, before she even threaded it, that most of it was gone. The tape had warped. The label was half-eaten by damp. Someone had written 3 words in faded ink. June 18th, private. She set it in the cradle anyway. That was the job. Other people threw away what time had ruined. Nia rebuilt it. The lab was hers, a narrow studio on the 4th floor with foam on the walls and a window she never opened. Around her sat 40 deteriorated reels from the Cultural Institute, boxes marked with a dead man's name. Seizo, her husband's father. She had signed for them the way she signed for everything. Read the terms, restored the audio, asked nothing else. The first pass gave her static. The second gave her breath. By the 4th, she had 3 voices, layered and buried, arguing under a wall of hiss. One of them she recognized from other tapes in the same box, the old man, Do-jin's father. The second she had never heard. The third stayed drowned. She cleaned a frequency, pulled a hum. Then one sentence surfaced out of the noise, clean enough to keep. His brother never reaches the bridge. Nia stopped the playback. 15 years ago, Do-jin's older brother had died on a bridge. A car, a chase, a river. Everyone said accident. The family said fate. She had heard the story twice in 3 years, both times with the lights low and the subject closed before she could ask. She played the line again. Same words, same flat certainty in the unknown voice. She did not save it to the Institute drive. She saved it to a private folder, then to a second card she kept in the zippered pocket of her bag, the one nobody knew about. Her phone lit. Do-jin. Home late, don't wait up. She typed back 1 word and meant it, and hated that she meant it. At home, 3 years of marriage had a shape she could trust with her eyes closed. She was the one who crossed the distance first. She fixed his tie before meetings he never explained. She slept with her head on his chest and woke with his hand in her hair. He was a man the whole city stepped around, and she was the one person who reached for him without checking his mood first. That was the part she carried out the door the next morning, without knowing she was carrying it. She worked the tape for 2 more days. The third voice began to come loose from the noise. Not the words yet, the shape of them, the rhythm of a man giving instructions. She built a filter to strip the room tone. Behind the voices, faint, she caught something else. A bell, metal, 3 notes, spaced. She wrote it in her notebook and drew a box around it. Then she looked up because the motion light in the stairwell had clicked on, and no one else had a key to this floor. Nobody came up. The light went off on its own. She told herself it was the old wiring. She stayed another hour to prove it to herself, which was its own kind of admission. When she finally left, past 11, the garage was cold and half-lit, and 2 men were standing between her car and the ramp. They wore the gray she knew, Seo security. Clean coats, earpieces, the posture of men who never had to raise their voices. One of them she'd seen at the house, holding a door. He said her name the way staff said it, Mrs. Co. Then, gentler than a threat, worse than one. "We need to talk to you." Her first thought was Dojin. Something happened to him. The thought moved her feet before her mind caught up, and she was already stepping toward them when the second man opened the rear door of a black car that was not one of the house cars. "Is he all right?" she asked. Neither answered. That was the answer. She looked at the ramp, she looked at the phone in her hand. She could call him, and if he was hurt, no one would pick up. And if he wasn't, then these were his men, and this was his summons. And calling would only tell them she was afraid. "Where?" she said. "It's not far." She got in. She would go over that decision for a long time afterward. Not because she'd been forced, but because she hadn't been. She'd walked to the car on her own legs, holding the belief that her husband's name meant safety. The belief was the trap. It had always been the trap. She just hadn't had a reason to see it. The car pulled out smooth and quiet. No sirens, no speed. The men didn't speak. One of them watched the road, the other watched her hands. She kept her bag on her lap and her fingers loose and her face still. And under all of it, she counted turns the way she counted frequencies. Because a room could be identified by its echo, and a route could be remembered by its rhythm. They left the bright part of the city. The buildings got lower. Somewhere out the window, a train ran. And past the train, a public clock let out 3 metal notes, spaced. Naya turned her head toward the sound before she could stop herself. The man watching her hands finally spoke. "Almost there," he said. The room they walked her into had 1 table and no windows. Choi Sung-min was already sitting on the far side, hands folded, patient as a man waiting for a train he knew would come. She knew him. Everyone in the family knew him. Head of security for 20 years, the man who had taught Dojin how to survive after the brother died, close enough to the old blood to sit at any table without being asked. He rose an inch when she entered, courtesy worn smooth by decades. "Mrs. Seijo, thank you for coming." "I didn't come. I was collected." He almost smiled. "Sit, please." She sat because standing gave him a reason to have her held down, and she wanted to keep that reason off the table as long as possible. "You've been working on the Institute tapes," he said. It wasn't a question. "One in particular." "I work on 40 tapes. June 18th. Naya kept her breathing even. "It's damaged. I couldn't recover anything usable." Sung-min looked at her for a moment with the calm of a man reading a page he'd already read. "That's disappointing," he said, "because you're very good. Your husband tells everyone how good you are." He reached into a folder and laid a single sheet in front of her, turned so she could read it. It was an internal authorization, the CO private system. She had seen documents from that system before, on Dojin's desk, on his phone. This one carried his seal, his authentication string. And near the bottom, a phrase she had heard him use in his own orders, in his own voice. "Your husband prefers certain matters stay inside the family," Sung-min said. The floor of her marriage tilted. She read the seal again, the authentication, the phrase. "Dojin sent me here." She didn't believe it, and she couldn't unsee it, and the 2 things happened inside her at once, and neither would let go of the other. "I need the copy," Sung-min said. "Where is it?" "There's no copy of nothing." "Mrs. Co. There's nothing on the tape." He nodded once, to the men, not to her. What happened next did not happen the way she would later be unable to describe it to a doctor. No one hit her. That was the thing she kept returning to. One man took her arms and folded them behind the chair. When she pushed up out of the seat, the other pressed her down at the shoulders and drove her ribs into the table edge, and held her there while she fought, because fighting was the only decision left that was hers. Something in her side gave with a sound she felt more than heard. The straps they used to keep her wrists. Seo's security issue, she would recognize the mark later, bit a line into her skin. They asked again. She gave them nothing because nothing was the truth, and because the second card was in a pocket they never searched, and because somewhere under the pain, a colder part of her had already decided that whoever these men answered to would not get to say they'd won. It went on long enough for Sungmin to believe her. That was the only mercy in the room. He raised one finger and they let go. She stayed in the chair. She would not let them see her fold. At the door, Sungmin paused. He did not look cruel. He looked like a man closing a file. "Your husband built this world," he said. "Don't confuse marriage with access." They drove her home. They even opened the gate for her. Inside, the house was lit low and warm and full of men in good suits. Through the glass wall of the study, she could see the long table, the decanter, the meeting still running past midnight. Dojin sat at the head. To his right, in the chair nearest the power in the room, sat Choi Sung-min, changed out of the gray, saying something that made her husband tilt his head and listen. Dojin trusted him. She could see the trust from 30 feet away, in the angle of his neck. Naya stood in the dark of the hall with a line of fire down her ribs and did the math the way she did everything, cleanly, without letting it touch her face. If Dojin gave that order, then confronting him tells him she still has proof, still has the tape, still knows where to look, and she will not survive being useful to him. If Dojin did not give that order, then someone inside his house can forge his authority, wear his name, move his men, and saying so out loud with no evidence in a house that man controls is the same as handing herself over. Both roads ended in the same place: speak now, unarmed, and lose. So she made the only decision that was hers to make, the same one she'd made at the table, the same one she'd make 100 times before this was over. Find out first. She went up the back stairs so she wouldn't cross the study. In the bedroom, she stood at the mirror and unhooked her earrings with hands that had stopped shaking through pure refusal. She heard the meeting break, heard the front door, the cars, the house going quiet. Heard him on the stairs. Dojin came in the way he always did, crossed the room the way he always did, and set his hand at her waist from behind the way he had 1,000 nights. Her whole body recoiled off his touch before her mind could dress it as anything else. He took his hand away. In the mirror, she watched him watch her, and she watched the first question arrive in his eyes. Not anger, never anger, just the still, patient attention of a man who had noticed something and would not stop until he understood it. "Did I hurt you?" he said. "I'm tired," she said. He believed her, but he did not look away. She started sleeping with her back to him. Small things gave her away, and she rationed them one at a time. She changed in the bathroom now, door shut. She wore long sleeves in a warm house. At dinner, he reached to move a strand of hair off her cheek, and she pulled back before she knew she'd done it, and her glass rocked and steadied. Dojin cataloged every one of them. He was a man who read rooms for a living, and the room he could no longer read was his wife. First he thought she was angry. Then he thought it went deeper. Then he thought she had finally understood exactly what he was, and had started to be afraid of him, and that possibility sat in him like swallowed glass. He found the box she'd rented, a small private safe across the city, opened in her name 3 weeks back. He didn't touch what was inside. He didn't have to. A passport, a marriage certificate, a few things a person keeps when they are getting ready to leave. He stopped reaching for her after that. He told himself it was respect. It was fear wearing respect's coat. One night, he said it plainly, in the dark, "Is there someone else?" She turned her head and for a second didn't understand the question. "You think I'm having an affair?" "I don't know what to think anymore. That's the first time," she said, "that you've felt what it's like to be married to someone who doesn't tell you everything." The line landed somewhere he couldn't reach to pull it out. She went on doing what she'd decided to do. She bought the strong painkillers and hid the box. When the clinic called, Dr. Yoonji Park's number on the screen, she ended the call before the second sentence. She read internal security codes at 2 in the morning. She spent whole nights inside the metadata of a ruined tape, chasing 3 metal notes and a train. In the back of a CO car, waiting on Dojin outside a restaurant, she photographed the restraint strap looped on the door pocket, the buckle turned so the mark it made would show. She asked a staffer, casual as weather, when the facility on the east side had come online. She kept a careful, cold distance from one man in particular and went stiff as a post whenever she saw her husband lean toward him to listen. Dojin saw that too. He filed it with the rest and understood none of it. He came home early on a gray afternoon, hours before she expected him, and found her in the kitchen reaching for a box on the high shelf. It was tipping. He crossed the room the way instinct told him to, fast, and caught her around the waist to pull her clear. She screamed. Not startled. He knew startled. This was the other thing. She folded around herself. A bowl came down and broke on the tile between them. He let go, like she'd burned him. When she bent, the hem of her blouse rode up 2 inches, and he saw the white of a medical wrap bound tight around her ribs, and above it a bruise going the yellow-green of a thing days old. He went completely still. She dragged the blouse down. He caught his own wrist with his other hand, holding himself in place, keeping himself from touching her, and the effort of it stood out on his jaw. "Who did this?" he said. She said nothing. Then he saw her wrist, where the sleeve had slipped, the darkened line laid clean across the skin. He knew that mark. He knew the width of it and the tool that made it, because it was made by a restraint carried by one team of men in this city, and every one of those men answered to his house. The kitchen was very quiet. The broken bowl lay between his shoes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. She looked at him. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She had rehearsed nothing. And that was why what came out was the true thing and the worst thing. The sentence that had been sitting in her chest since a windowless room with one table. Because they said you already knew. The words went into him and did not come back out. He stood in his own kitchen, a man who had never in his life been slow, and for the length of a held breath he could not move, because the thing he was being accused of was not the beating. It was that she had spent days believing he could have ordered it. His hand came up on its own, toward her face, the oldest gesture between them. She stepped back from it. He stopped. He lowered the hand. He didn't ask why she'd flinched. He didn't demand anything. He looked at the bruise and the wrap and the mark his own men left, and then at the small distance she had put between them, and he let the distance stand. "Who?" he said again, and this time it was not aimed at her. "No," she said. "Naya. I won't hand you a name so you can make someone disappear." Her breath caught on the ribs and she rode through it. "If you want me to believe you weren't part of this, then find the truth without turning into exactly the man they told me you were." Outside the light was failing. Neither of them had turned on a lamp. In the near dark he understood, finally, that his power, the whole apparatus of it, the men, the reach, the name people stepped around, could do nothing here. It was the reason she was hurt. It might have been the weapon. He crouched, slowly, and began to pick up the pieces of the bowl, one shard at a time, because it was the only thing in the room he was allowed to hold. He pulled the authorization himself that night. It was real, issued on his credential, authenticated by his private device, stamped with his seal. For a moment even Dojin looked shaken, because a document existed that ordered hands onto his wife, and it wore his own name. Naya read it over his shoulder, forcing her mind past what it had cost her. She stopped on one line. "Keep it inside the walls," she read. "You don't say that." "No, your father did." He went quiet. Only one man still living had written orders for the old man, had sat close enough to learn the phrasing, the seal, the private rhythm of the house, had taught a grieving son how to hold a knife and a company at the same time. She set her own conditions before she gave him anything more. No tracking her devices, no men behind her without her word, no hidden information, and he would not touch her unless she said he could. He agreed to all of it without a single argument, which was, in its way, the first proof she believed. Kim Jae-won found the copied credentials, lifted during a system update months back, not by an outsider, by someone with the keys. Mina Seo rebuilt the timeline from 15-year-old records, and Naya, alone with the tape, finally pulled the third voice clean out of the noise. It was not the old man ordering his son's death. It was Seong-min. For 15 years, he had let Do-jin believe his father signed that bridge. The restored audio caught the father trying to call it off. Too late. Outrun by a man already moving. Do-jin had hated a dead man for a crime the dead man tried to stop. Seong-min moved before they could. He came to Do-jin, calm as ever, and offered the oldest poison. She works in audio. She can fabricate any voice. She's been distant for weeks. She rented a box to leave you. Ask yourself who benefits. And for the length of a breath, in a man already bleeding from every insecurity Seong-min had spent months feeding, it worked. Do-jin's eyes went to his wife with a flicker of doubt. Naya saw it. It hurt worse than the table, worse than the strap. She didn't beg. She closed the laptop and stood. If after all this you still need me to prove I'm not your enemy, she said, then our problem is bigger than that recording. She walked out. He stayed in the chair, and in the empty room he understood at last that he had spent his whole life demanding loyalty while offering only half his trust, and that the man who taught him to do it was counting on exactly that. She went back to the tape and worked the layer under the voices. 3 metal notes. A rail announcement, faint. She matched the platform to the old station beside the warehouse, where the meeting happened 15 years ago. Then the public clock, striking the quarter hour, and by the spacing she fixed the exact time of the conversation. Weather records, vehicle logs, old call routing. The father was somewhere else when the final order went out. Seong-min was in the warehouse. It was no longer one voice against another. It was a timeline no one could argue with. Do-jin called the oldest men of the organization to the table. Seong-min came certain the wife would be the one accused. Naya walked in without guards and set a small recorder on the table. Seong-min smiled. A recording, made by an audio expert. That proves very little. I agree, she said. Then she laid out everything that did not depend on the voice. The train, the clock, the weather, the vehicle entries, the copied credential, the medical record with its date, and the forged authorization used against her. Created, she showed them, at an hour when Do-jin was outside the country, from a device physically inside the Seo building. He could not have made it. Only someone with the walls could. Seong-min stopped pretending. He looked at Do-jin and said he had saved this family, that the brother was weak, that the father was sentimental, that Do-jin only became the man he was because Seong-min cleared the road. Then the last mistake, even her, I was trying to protect you from her. You still don't understand, Do-jin said. She didn't need my protection from you. I needed to have believed her before you got near her. He did not have Seong-min killed. That was the old road, the one that kept making men like Seong-min possible. He handed the prosecutors the proof of 15 years of private operations. And to do it, he had to hand over pieces of his own house, routes, companies, men, money, reach. He watched part of the empire go and did not reach to save it. Seong-min was arrested, not because Do-jin was more violent, because he finally stopped protecting the system that had let a Seong-min exist. The truth fixed nothing overnight. Naya slept in another room, and he didn't protest. When they passed in the hall, he left the space between them. When he wanted to touch her, he asked, and sometimes she said yes and sometimes no, and he took both the same way. He tore out the parts of the house she'd been locked out of. He killed the tracking on her car. Protection you can't refuse, he said, isn't protection. 2 months later, she presented a sound preservation exhibit at a small museum in Seoul. He stood at the back, no men around him, just waiting. When the room emptied, they were alone by an old recording booth. He didn't reach for her. She crossed the last of the distance and opened her hand between them, palm up, asking nothing, offering the choice. May I? He said. Yes. He took her hand. Nothing more. No grand embrace. She watched their fingers and felt her body stay where it was, and then she took the small step herself and set her head on his shoulder, and he closed his eyes and did not pull her in. This is how we start again, she said. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever flinched from someone you loved and stayed silent because you weren't sure whose side the truth was on? Have you ever carried a wound alone because the people who hurt you wore a name you trusted? And if the person you loved finally asked to be let back in, would you have the courage to offer your hand first? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about trust, truth, and dignity, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.